So in this episode, we're going to talk about unanswered questions from the CMMC-AB Town Hall. I'm joined by Ty Wittenberg of Rain Associates.
Morning, Todd. How are you?
Very good. So I am the Regional Sales Manager at Etactics. We're a software development company, and basically we just want to make it easier to implement CMMC, so we developed the better GRC. Ty, do you want to introduce yourself and Rain Associates?
Ty Wittenberg, as you have heard from Todd and me once again, with Rain Associates. Rain Associates is a top 100 CPA and business consulting firm located here in Ohio, but doing business with clients all across the country and providing cyber security services along with registered provider organization in the CMMC space.
And thank you for joining us. So we've been participating in these town halls for the past year, and there's a lot of questions that get asked in these events that the accreditation board either doesn't have the time to answer, or maybe the answer is just lengthier than a short response in the chat box. So I thought it might be a good opportunity for us to leverage the experience of somebody like Ty, take some of these questions from the dialogue box and talk about them. So let's switch gears and talk about the last question, which was in regards to really two events. One was the executive order from May, talking about cybersecurity following the SolarWinds hack. And then the other was around recent executive or congressional actions related to CMMC. And the question was, do these recent government actions present any risk or maybe opportunities when it comes to the implementation of CMMC? So have you read through, we'll start with the executive order, have you read through that recently, or do you want me to give you kind of an overview of my summary in a couple quick sentences?
So you can give your summary as well too, but I have read through it. The executive order, the one that really stands out for me about what the president's executive order states is that, within 90 days of the date of this order, the Secretary of Defense, through the Director of the NSA and the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security and National Intelligence, shall jointly develop procedures for ensuring that, cyber incident reports are promptly and appropriately shared among agencies. That is giving a direct mission statement of what they need to do. And I would just say that, from these executive orders, the same executive orders that came from President Trump about defending or improving the defense industrial base is what drove CMMC, with the DoD. So I think, zero trust, incident response are all critical parts. Every day you hear in the news of ransomware events from advanced threat actors, from malicious phishing campaigns, you name it. So we've got to get better at communicating and sharing that information. And more importantly, creating mitigation processes to safeguard those systems that house controlled unclassified information.
And do you think the acknowledgement towards NIST and CISA and the lack of acknowledgement towards the CMMC-AB or CMMC in general, do you think that presents any risk to CMMC itself and its implementation, or is that more related to what roles NIST plays and what role the CISA plays when it comes to the executive's branch approach to cybersecurity?
So both NIST and both CISA have been direct influencers and backbones, in my opinion, of the CMMC-AB. So I don't think that's a slight to them. The CMMC accreditation body was supposed to be, kind of the not third-party cheerleader, but to go back to one of your other questions, because the DoD does not talk regularly with folks, it was supposed to be your resource to be able to get those types of information or questions answered around, or information around the questions that you have. So NIST is a backbone of what we do. CISA is as well too. A lot of the folks that helped put together the CMMC maturity model were incredibly involved with CISA and with NIST. those folks from Carnegie Mellon, those folks from Johns Hopkins out in your neck of the woods. So it's not a slight by any means. If anything, it provides and fuels guidance to the CMMC-AB about how we help guide organizations seeking certification.
And I kind of see it as like if you consider the cybersecurity within the federal space here as a pyramid, NIST would be that foundational level, right? They're coming up with the standards and the best practices that everything is kind of built from. Whereas the CISA is really the top of the pyramid. I mean, they're looking at the trends. They have access to all the information and everything in between. I mean, that's really the ecosystem, if you will, that the CMMC-AB is building, right? It's the body of knowledge in terms of how to implement these NIST controls. The assessment of making sure that the contractors are doing things correctly, and the communication of how to improve overall all these things that NIST has generated. So yeah, it'd be a good way to summarize it.
Yeah, I like your analogy of the pyramid. It makes me think of I'm going to show my age a little bit. Coach John Wooden of the UCLA Bruins. He passed a few years ago, but he used to have this pyramid of success that he talked about with every single player, and it started with these foundational items. And so, to your point, NIST is foundational, FAR is foundational, DFARS is foundational in that process as it moves up, like you said. So, great analogy.
So we'll switch gears slightly. I don't think you saw this this testimony, but the question asked about recent congressional actions when it comes to CMMC. So I had to dig a little bit to find something, but are you familiar at all with a hearing held by the Subcommittee on Oversight, Investigations, and Regulations from June? Jonathan Williams of a law firm based out of DC, Pilar Mazza, in that testimony, did you hear about that, or have you read that article?
No, tell me a little bit about that one. There's so much information that floats out there. I try to ingest as much as I can, but as you know, sometimes it's like a fire hose.
It reminded me a lot of the letter we talked about from NDIA and the other industry groups, where you've got this attorney who's obviously representing organizations within the defense industrial base that had concerns, and you had this subcommittee that was willing to hear the concerns of industry as it related to CMMC, and there are actually some great points that kind of got me thinking, things that I didn't know. Like, for example, one of the things he talked about was unpopulated joint ventures, right? So if two small businesses get together and they have an unpopulated joint venture, so they've got a new business entity that is supporting a contract or won a contract, but they don't actually have any employees and they don't have any information systems because it's a joint venture, and those employees and information systems work for those respective small businesses or prime contractors that participate in the joint venture. Should they require CMMC? And it just wasn't something that I had really even thought of. So what they were lobbying for was, if it's a joint venture and it's unpopulated, that really should be exempt from CMMC. What are your thoughts on that?
So if I take what you're saying correctly, it's more of fractionalized employees within the organization, not the organization systems touching CUI, but them providing professional consultation or support to achieve the contract, correct?
Well, they're saying if it was an unpopulated joint venture, so there's no employees that work directly for the contract holder, right? But then you have, by association, the small businesses or the contractors that make up that joint venture. They're saying, what they're lobbying for was CMMC should only apply to one of the partners that actually handles that covered information, and not all parties participating in that joint venture, if that makes more sense.
No, I think we're saying probably the same thing, but that's okay. Yes, I don't believe, I do not believe that the organization that is not necessarily an employee, I don't think that they have to be CMMC matured as well either. Because in essence, you're a contracted employee that's working within the organization that should have the maturity model. Your organization that's your primary employer, or the business, like you were talking about, is not is not touching federal contract information, is not touching controlled unclassified information. You are just a subsection resource within that contract. You're a specialty. So, yeah, I don't believe that other business needs to be CMMC certified.
I think they just need to be careful about, the way they share that controlled and classified information. If one is certified and the other is not, I think there has to be delineation in terms of who has access to that CUI,
Correct.
right, and where it's stored, right?
Yep. That all speaks to segmentation.
Another one you might be more familiar with than I was. There is within the Small Business Administration something called the All Small Mentor Protege Program, the ASMPP. Are you familiar with that?
That came up in a conversation that I was having with a Northeast Ohio, organization. They spoke about that SB Mentor Protege. So I'm not necessarily an expert on that, but it was pretty interesting to me. But what particularly were you thinking about with that?
So what they were lobbying for was more financial and technical resources to help small businesses when it comes to getting their certification, which makes sense, right? Yep. The more money and funding these organizations have, the more contractors they can support. But they also point out interesting restriction. I guess you can only have within that program 2 different mentors. Which, when you look at the different areas of their business that they might be getting consulting for, it might already be, one mentor for procurement and another mentor for, technical aspects of what you're bidding on or what you're working on. So CMMC is really a third dimension. And so what they're asking for was to end that restriction to only have 2 mentors, so that an organization that's already leveraging this program could use it for CMMC as well, which seemed to make good sense.
Yeah,
right?
I would think the manufacturing extension programs, the magnet programs, were an outgrowth from NIST to help manufacturers in this particular space. I think this is one, when you talk about it, that there should probably be some partnership between the NIST and the manufacturer and magnet or the PTAC programs and the SBA to formulate a better strategy for these small businesses to provide better mentorship, because that limitation of resources, not all mentors can be all things as you're developing your business model and developing your maturity, especially if you're in the defense industrial base.
Right. And so a couple more points on small businesses that they lobbied, for. One was to be fast-tracked for certification if they win a contract that has CMMC requirements. I think the concern there was, right now you don't have to have a certification to bid on a contract, right? So if I bid on a contract and I win it, and I'm talking maybe 2023, and I don't have my certification yet, can I find a way to be fast-tracked for certification because I've got this, contract that I've been awarded or will be awarded in the near future? So can that put me to the front of the line when it comes to getting that certification through a third-party audit organization? So, I think that makes sense, but I think that's just difficult to do, right? Because now you're telling the C3PAO how to prioritize those assessments that they're doing. I just think from an implementation standpoint, although it's nice in theory, I think it's going to be hard to implement. What do you think?
So Todd, I don't know if you remember when I talked about for 2021, there was going to be roughly, like
15, I think, contracts.
15 contracts, and then it was going to grow exponentially. I think your C3PAOs and your primes already know that, and so they're working through fast tracking those particular organizations that are doing that already. I think where it'll become a concern is if you start lagging behind in your certification and you wait till the last minute when 2026 comes, and now you've bid on a project which is a pretty big one for you, and you expect to be fast tracked.
Right. I do think it's a legitimate concern, but to your point, better to start sooner, especially if you're bidding on a contract, and you should be doing these things already. Get yourself.
Your challenge and my challenge, organization seeking certification,
Another one was to build in what they called flow down protections for small businesses. So what they're really talking about was, preventing prime contractors from requiring a higher level of CMMC than really is ultimately necessary, to enable communications between the subcontractor and the contracting officer, right? Which today, I guess those lines of communication aren't really available, right? The sub has to go through the prime, and the prime deals with the contracting officer. But I guess what they're really concerned about would be, the prime contractors, the big guys, creating these requirements that aren't really necessary just to protect themselves, right? So that if there's no need to flow down CUI, but the prime wants to, protect themselves and say, well, there might be a need, at some point down the road. So let's go ahead and require this, higher level CMMC than really is ultimately necessary. What are your thoughts on, trying to build in some type of protection around that?
Well, I can't necessarily speak to that. I've seen anything where they are requesting that, right? If anything, even those procurement managers in the prime, they're in flux trying to figure out what they need to do around certification. So the first thing that they did, which was more of a trickle down like you're talking about, was to tell anybody that was bidding on contracts, make sure you upload your 800-171 NIST assessment into the supplier risk portal, right? And so have you done it? And do you have a plan of action milestones? I think the way the CMMC is written, that they're not going to be able to bubble up that expectation. But once again, we can't determine how a procurement office is going to go through their selection process. If I, Ty Wittenberg, Inc., decide to be and achieve maturity level 4 and do that type of work, that's just I think an organic part of the whole bidding a job process. So I want to be very careful here about how I speak to that, because you want to make sure that the competitive landscape for small businesses is there. But that procurement process, I don't think that they will be able to say, in order to do a CMMC maturity level 3 job that has CUI, you have to have maturity level 4. What I would really like to see come out of this, Todd, is more of these larger organizations realize through cloud management and the resources that they have that they create ways where they control the information within their information systems and create portals for access, right? Where it only gets tricky, I think, sometimes is when you're working with folks that do engineering type work and they do computer aided design and stuff like that, and they create things or improve things upon diagrams. Right. You start creating controlled unclassified information in your environment, and then yes, you have to be mature. But if you can create it within the prime's environment and still be the sub and only have to have maturity level 1, but because you have the specialty skills, you only keep the data in their particular environment. I think that would be the real win for small businesses.
And that actually, you kind of stole the last talking point, which was, creating these secure enclaves is what they called them within the prime's environment, making it accessible to a sub, so that they would only need like a maturity level 1 certification to access it. So, hey, reading ahead for an article that you didn't read, yeah, that's pretty good.